I'm arguing, for the sake of getting you all excited here, that unsustainability, the state that we now find ourselves, is an inevitable emergent property of the interaction of the human species as we currently think. Okay, it's the modern mind interacting with nature, because the way we think in terms of the beliefs, values, and assumptions under which we operate, particularly in our economies, are so far removed from the way in which natural systems function that there is no way that you can compatibly integrate the two. So if you have two systems that are so fundamentally different in their structure and operation and try to merge them together, unsustainability is an inevitable emergent property. I'm going to argue that both genes, that is to say our natural genetic behavior, as well as our cultural belief set is involved in this. And I'm going to further argue that the behavioral adaptations, or rather the behavioral drivers in this, the innate qualities, were once adaptive. They stood us well 50,000 years ago when the environment was relatively constant. But when we're in a situation of rapid environmental change, they're no longer adaptive. So we have literally made ourselves maladaptive to the very ecological or environmental conditions that we ourselves have created. Okay? Now, here's the kicker, and there's plenty of evidence in our history. What happens if a genetic mutation is maladaptive to the environment in which the organism carrying that mutation finds itself? Well, it's wiped out. Okay. So if you have a maladaptation, you will not survive. If you think in a maladaptive way, if your mimetic constructs, if your cultural paradigm, if your worldview, if your ideology is inappropriate to the circumstances in which you are expressing that ideology, you will be selected out. So I'm arguing here that just as bad genes are removed by natural selection, so can bad memes, mimetic constructs, be removed by natural selection. And that's the basis for arguing that whole societies have failed, have collapsed historically, because they refused to change their beliefs, values, and assumptions in the face of contrary knowledge. Now, where did we start this? We are seeing knowledge from many, many disciplines piling up to show that we're on a wrong tack. And yet we do not respond because we stick rigidly to a particular set of beliefs, values, and assumptions about the economy, about growth, about a whole variety of things that are completely at odds with the nature of the reality within which we find ourselves embedded. So we're no different from previous cultures that have gone down as a result of that dilemma. So let's then look in detail at the drivers I'm talking about here. Human beings, as I said, are evolved species, just like any other. What happens if you drop a single bacterium on a petri dish of nutrients? It becomes a colony, and within a few days, under ideal conditions, it will completely cover that petri dish. It'll just keep replicating and replicating every 15 or 20 minutes until all the resources are used up and the entire space is covered. And then it dies out. Actually, the bacteria cells have the advantage of being able to sporulate, and then they blow away to find another petri dish or dead fruit or whatever it might be. But the point is, every species has two tendencies that humans share. The first is the tendency to expand to fill all the potential habitat. What do you think is the species, the large-scale vertebrate species, with the largest geographical range on the planet? Okay, it's sitting in your seats. Okay. So we are just much better, because of our intellect, our cumulative mimetic endowment, at exploiting the habitats on this planet, so that no habitat that is even remotely capable of sustaining human life does not have it. We are there in numbers on every habitable landscape on Earth. And we will, like other species, use up all available resources. Now this one, a lot of people have problems with, because they'll point out this or that indigenous culture that has not destroyed its habitat. And I would argue that in the case of humans, whether or not we are able to use all the resources is technology dependent. How many of you own a credit card? Okay, not only will humans use up all available resources, but when you run out of resources, you will invent one called a piece of plastic, which enables you to use up even more resources that don't yet exist, and you have to go out and earn to pay down your credit card. This is a predisposition. How many of you have gone to a buffet, eaten your fill, and said, "That's it, this is the last canapé I'm going to touch"? And within 3 minutes, you're back there, almost unconsciously, eating. And you know, you've done this, haven't you? You've picked it, you got it in your mouth. Damn, I wasn't going to do that. Well, guess what's working, you see? That's that little reptilian brainstem just trying to stuff you, because, you see, under primitive conditions, you wouldn't leave food lying around. It would rot. So there was an advantage to cramming yourself as full as you could when you had the food available and packing it onto your butt and your tum for those lean times. It is by no accident that the northern hemisphere, well, I shouldn't say that any longer, that the rich people on this planet have among their numbers, of course there aren't any in this room, but about 1 billion people who are obese. Precisely because they cannot keep their fingers out of the cookie bowl. We will use the available resources to which we have access. There are another 1 billion people who are malnourished at the other end of the income spectrum, all of which is just to illustrate a simple point. We're no different from other species. We'll use all the habitat and we'll consume all the resources. We are also characterized by certain qualities that make us out to be what is called a K-strategist by biologists. Different species have different strategies by which to propagate themselves. Some do so by having an inordinate growth rate or potential growth rate. They produce prodigious numbers of eggs or seeds. So if you think of a codfish that may be 2 meters long, a big full female, 30,000, 60,000 eggs. If you think of an alder tree, one of our more adapted opportunistic tree species in this area, thousands and thousands of winged seeds. They're called R strategists, R for rate. They get by just spreading seeds all over the environment, and not one tiny fraction of 1% ever grows. That's all you need, one to replace the tree, but billions of seeds or eggs go out there. So that's a strategy. We're way over at the other end of the spectrum called K-strategists. Our strategists tend to have short lives, prodigious reproductive potential, no parental care whatsoever. Codfish do not look after their 60,000 offspring, for example. K-strategists, long lives, relatively large, low reproduction rate, large degrees of parental care, high survival. Most of our offspring survive today, for example. And so humans are characteristic K-strategists. Now what K-strategists do always is press up against the carrying capacity of their habitats. This was Malthus's great insight. Humankind will press up against the carrying capacity, the food limits, whatever it might be, of their habitat. So this is exponential growth. We tend to follow that, but then as we approach the capacity of our environments, the population growth rate declines because resource depletion, pollution of the environment, overcrowding, other symptoms of this nature. So humans are classical K-strategists, always with that tendency to press up, which simply again is another way of saying we will occupy all the habitat and use all the resources.